Welcome to a Prevent Connect podcast, where we explore the prevention of violence against women. This is a project of the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault.
Welcome everyone. Again, my name is Ashley Klein-Jimenez. I'm with Prevent Connect in Cal Casa, and you're joining us for our web conference today, Participatory Action in Schools, Improving School Climate and Safety in K-12 Schools for Sexual and Teen Dating Violence Prevention. Prevent Connect is a national project of the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault, sponsored by U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The views and information provided in this web conference do not necessarily represent the official views of the U.S. government, CDC, or Cal Casa. So I want to go ahead and pass this over to our partners at Prevention Institute. Alicia Somji, I'm going to go ahead and let you introduce the Prevention Institute team, but as always, we're really glad to be here with you.
Thanks, Ashley, and welcome to the team, Tori. It's great to have you here as well. So I'm Alicia, and with me from Prevention Institute, I have Sonia, who's helping out with web teching today, so you can always private chat to Prevention Institute account if you have any web tech related questions. And we also have Abina here, who is also new to our Prevent Connect team, and will be joining us for the rest of our series this year. So welcome Abina to the team as well. To go through our objectives for today, so we will be describing how participatory action research and things like hotspot mapping can help uncover safety issues in school settings. One moment.
All guests have been muted. You can unmute your line by pressing *6.
Another objective for this session is around exploring how youth, school personnel, and community leaders are really starting to lift up student voice and not just thinking about, just curriculum, but also modifying physical and social aspects of school environments to prioritize safety. And last, we're hoping that we can engage in a candid discussion on how school climates and environments can support safety as well. So we encourage you to use our text chat function here and really engage in a dialogue with us today. And on that note, I wanted to start us off with a text chat question today to really ask you how you define school climate. So what does school climate mean to you, and what does it have to do with preventing teen dating violence and other forms of violence? So please use the text chat function here, and we'll come back to see what you're all saying. While you are typing, I wanted to share this news article, which we'll share the link to in the text chat, but it says, improving school climate, not just security, is key to violence prevention. And I think often when we think about schools and preventing violence, especially forms of violence like community violence, people often go to thinking about security and how can we have higher levels of security in school. But this article really talks about looking beyond security and really thinking about school climate. From the Connecting the Dots Centers for Disease Control and Prevention document, it talks about how youth who feel connected and committed to school are at lower risk of harming others, and this is for multiple forms of violence again. So this is for dating violence, youth violence, bullying, and even suicide. So we can really see how thinking about school climate can help us prevent multiple forms of violence, whereas maybe security as the only option may not address some of these other forms. So I really liked this visual here that comes from the National School Climate Center. I think often when we think about school climate, we'll just think about the social aspects, but this really helps illustrate that it's about the classroom, it's about the community, the building, even the school district and decisions being made at that level. So I really like thinking about school climate in a more holistic way. And because of that, I also wanted to bring up Prevention Institute's Thrive framework, which we use across different health and safety issues, really taking a health equity approach to prevention. And it breaks down the environment into people, place, and equitable opportunity. And so thinking about this in relation to schools, when we think about the sociocultural environment, we can think about school connectedness and the norms that exist in a school, how schools can make violence a school-wide issue and not just a private matter, especially around things like teen dating violence, sexual violence. Also, it reminds us to think about place and the physical built environment, even in our schools. So how can things like increasing visibility, having more windows, creating a warm and welcoming environment, for example, having student art in hallways, how can that also support safety and create a positive school climate? And I know that there's been a lot of work around shifting boundaries, which is an evidence-based multi-level prevention program for middle school students. And that's really embraced this environmental approach and thinking more about place as well. And lastly, with the equitable opportunity cluster, we also know from research that school climate can also improve student achievement. So that gets me thinking about kind of the life course and how that can affect future outcomes and things like even maybe school graduation rates and career opportunities. So I think school climate is definitely an important thing for us to be talking about in the space of preventing violence and in the specific area that we're in, which is sexual and domestic violence prevention. The last thing I wanted to highlight is when we're thinking about school climate, you'll see here that the student is right at the center of the diagram on the left. And that really reminds us that we need the participation of young people in making decisions on what we want to do. So on that note, I thought I could introduce our first set of guests. Oh, first, before we introduce our guests, we should see what's happening in the text chat. Ashley, I haven't had a chance to read through it, so can you share with us what's coming up?
Sure, yeah, there were a lot of really good comments to our first question. And so looking at school climate, it's really about the student's perception of the school environment, the culture of the school, the environment that we create for students, this idea that violence is not acceptable here, and then, how does it support sexual and domestic violence prevention? Well, training staff to not perpetuate norms that support violence, and also having appropriate response in place can all really help kind of create a school climate that folks would perceive as safe. Mm-hmm. And there's still more coming in.
Yeah, and I also was reading the difference between rates of violence compared to perceptions of violence, and how it's important to also think about the perceptions that students have about safety. We actually have a student that's going to be participating a little bit later on, Izzy, who shared in the text chat that she's going to be going into 12th grade, and school climate includes the surroundings of the school, the way staff interacts with students, and the emotional feeling the students feel when they attend. School climate can prevent teen dating violence by making students feel comfortable and potentially sharing their voices in order to prevent these situations. So it's great to have your voice here, Izzy, sharing how you as a student feel about this issue as well. So thank you. With that, I think we can move over to our first set of guests. Feel free to continue text chatting here as we go along. I'm really enjoying this dialogue that we've started. So I'd like to introduce both Danielle and Derek. Danielle is the Sexual Violence Prevention Program Manager at the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. As a public health professional, she has worked on a variety of projects in partnership with both government and nonprofit sectors, and brings experience in community mobilization, grant development and management, and training and technical assistance. In her current role, she manages Colorado's Sexual Violence Prevention Community Grant Program and works to build stakeholder capacity in using a shared risk and protective factor approach to effective violence prevention. And joining Danielle is Derek, who works at Project PAVE. Derek joined PAVE in 2011 as the Youth Community Educators Program Coordinator, and has helped transform PAVE programming as the lead primary violence prevention educator and program developer. He, alongside his team, developed a healthy masculinity curriculum titled True Man, which is one of his main passions for working with PAVES. Derek believes that by transforming some key pieces within the masculine culture and creating safer spaces, we can really work towards decreasing violence. So I'll let you each say a quick hello, and then I'll ask you my first question.
Hi there, we're excited to be here.
Hello, thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you for joining. So last year, Danielle, I know that we had you on our web conference that was all about connecting the dots between multiple forms of violence, and you presented on Colorado's Violence and Injury Prevention Mental Health Promotion Strategic Plan, which is all focused on shared and protective factors. And today you're here more to share about your school-based work and work you've been doing around hotspot mapping. So I was wondering if you could connect the dots for us between, what is hotspot mapping and how does it really fit into this strategic plan?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you again for having us. I'm going to talk a little bit about the strategic plan and how it connects in, but I'm going to start with talking a little bit about what hotspot mapping is. This is a really nice map of Colorado just to get our frame set. But what is it? So basically, it's a data-informed approach and an evidence-based approach to identify spaces and develop recommendations for change. So when we talk about identifying spaces, we're identifying safe or unsafe, or you can often call them hot or cold spaces, and then working with the community to promote and identify recommendations that would change the surrounding environment, so practices, policies, structural changes, to impact. And we like to talk about it a little bit as both changing negative spaces, but also recognizing our strengths in communities and promoting the positive ones and learning how do we replicate our positive spaces across the larger community or school setting. And then I think something that's really important and an opportunity where it connects back to our strategic plan is that hotspot mapping is unique in that it can really impact a wide range of community-level risk and protective factors. And so some of the ones we often talk about in the way that we do our work here in Colorado is really looking to impact issues around community disorganization, community and school connectedness, and youth and adult connectedness. And what's great about this is that because we've kind of associated this work with these risk and protective factors, we're really able to translate that to other outcomes and other health and outcomes that we care about. So for example, in our branch with our strategic plan, we have folks who are working on suicide prevention, on child fatality prevention, on retail marijuana prevention, and we created a strategic plan to better outline where do our outcomes intersect across risk and protective factors, and how can we really start working together to better understand and really be impactful in the way that we work in our communities. And so hotspot mapping has been a really great opportunity to really practice that approach because it's something that a lot of our programs and different outcomes have sort of seen themselves in. And so we've been really able to connect our sexual violence prevention work with a lot of our other partners working on other health outcomes across our office.
Thank you for framing that and sharing the connections between the strategic plan and your overall direction with looking at shared risk and protective factors, and a little bit about hotspot mapping, which I know we're going to get more into about what that's all about. I understand that hotspot mapping is something that requires community participation, and as we've been seeing in the text chat and some of the introduction I did, this is really important. So I'm wondering how you go about this in Colorado.
Yeah, so I think something to note that's important is that hotspot mapping isn't actually new. It's existed in a lot of different iterations for several years. And so there are different ways to do it. And the way that we've adopted it in Colorado is really with a focus and a foundation on youth and community engagement. And so the idea behind this is really that we work through this process and this activity with hotspot mapping hand in hand with young people in particular, but also community members to really help us drive this work and to really take control and build youth agency for change in their community and their schools. I think the other piece to this that's really important is that we are not only collecting sort of this quantitative data, so we're not only collecting where spaces are safe or unsafe, but we're really truly understanding the why. And so working with our community partners and youth partners in this really helps us say that, okay, you identified the gym, for example, as unsafe. Why did you identify that, and then really kind of getting at the root of what's impacting young people's perceptions of safety in their spaces and what they think would be useful sort of changes that would really impact what they're experiencing. So again, it brings in that community context and community experience. And then I think the other piece to that is that Colorado has really worked over the past several years to lead its work through a positive youth development lens, and so really focused on how do we build youth skills, opportunities, and authentic relationships. And so hotspot mapping is, again, another unique opportunity to really practice this or operationalize it. And so it gives you the tools or sort of the structure to engage young people in an authentic way and help them move through identifying how they can improve their spaces.
That's great. And yeah, I know that Colorado also has a youth development tool, which we can share in the text chat. I know we were going to share it later on at the end, but maybe we can post that link right now too. So with that, I want to ask another text chat question for our audience, which is on the next slide here. Just give me a minute. So our question is, what safety concerns or issues have already been identified at K-12 schools in your community? So kind of what kind of things are coming up in your communities right now around certain concerns, or if you haven't actually spoken with community members or youth to this day or to this point, which ones do you think might be large issues that are coming up? And while we have folks sharing about that in the text chat, I'll ask Danielle and Derek another question, and then we'll come back. So the question is, what has the hotspot mapping process specifically looked like in Colorado, now that you've kind of given us a little outline on what hotspot mapping is?
Yeah, so it's a relatively new project for us in Colorado. We've been working on it since February of 2017, so about a year and a half. We have 7 local partners working across 7 different communities in Colorado on this project right now, and Derek is one of them, so I'm excited to have him share what this has kind of looked like for them. But just sort of as a general background, it's using guidance developed as part of the Shifting Boundaries curriculum, if folks are familiar with that. It's an evidence-based curriculum for teen dating violence and sexual violence. We particularly have just pulled out the hotspot mapping piece, which was shown to be the most impactful component of the curriculum, and so this is what we use to kind of guide the process in our community. We're specifically mapping spaces where people feel safe or unsafe, so it's intentionally kept broad. We don't necessarily ask folks, where have you experienced or where are you concerned about experiencing sexual violence. It's really more broadly thinking about school safety, because we anticipate that this project is really impacting a wide range of outcomes, kind of like I mentioned before, and so we want to be, we kind of want to own that and recognize that we can do a lot with a little in terms of this project. And then, skip ahead. And then I think the process is pretty flexible, but we sort of have outlined 6 elements of implementation for our state, and this is really how our partners have gone through getting this process up and started in their communities. And we're going to talk a little bit more about these in depth, but the first sort of major step around this is doing buy-in and youth recruitment. So who do you want involved, and who are the decision makers that by the time you get to the end of this process can really move your recommendations forward? A mapping activity and discussion, analyzing the results, identifying those recommendations that I've spoken about, presenting the results and recommendations to key stakeholders, and then ultimately, ideally, implementing those recommendations that you identified through this entire process.
Thanks for the brief outline, and I know that we're going to get into more detail about these elements, but first let's turn it back to see what's coming up in the text chat. I've been seeing a lot of different forms of violence coming up.
Yes.
Anything you want to share specifically?
Yeah, there are a lot of different forms of violence coming up. It looks like a lot of folks are seeing the same forms of violence in their schools. So, online harassment and bullying, physical violence, sexual harassment, gun violence is a big issue. There's also, someone mentioned inconsistent visitor policies, racism as an issue in the schools, lack of support for survivors. So these are just some of the ones that many people are sharing, Alicia. But if you scroll through, you'll see that there are lots of examples.
Yeah, and I also saw some things. I think I saw something about bus routes, as well as something about safety concerns on bike paths. So it's nice to see people thinking a little bit about the environmental approach. And once we start to define our issues beyond only just the form of violence, but like looking at how they're kind of being exhibited, can help us think more about what we can do to at a more environmental level for prevention. So for example, the one around a concern about safety in bike paths, like maybe things around lighting or, I don't know, having people be present in those spaces. And so it's got my wheels turning about solutions already, even though I know we're still at the defining the issue portion right now. So I want to turn it back to Danielle and bring Derek in, if you can delineate kind of these elements a little bit more for us. And then Derek, as one of the grantees who's been implementing this locally, we'd love if you could also provide some details on what this process of hotspot mapping has looked like in your community.
Great.
Awesome. So step one, like I said, is really buying in recruitment, and what we found is this is one of the most important processes. I mean, it's the first step for a reason, but really, like I said, identifying decision makers and stakeholders, and then also recruiting a large and diverse set of young people to both lead the project and also participate in it across all activities. But Derek can share a little bit more about what that looks like for them.
Absolutely. Before I share that, I'm going to take a step back to February of 2017 when this was initially introduced to us as the grantee organizations. When we first caught wind that Colorado Department of Health and Environment wanted us to take this approach to violence prevention, we were both excited and hesitant because most of us are coming from a history, and we also currently facilitate workshops to promote violence prevention in various capacities. So I saw this as a huge opportunity because a lot of the work that I've done historically is around helping individuals understand relationship dynamics, and this takes it to a broader context. So we still continue our individualized education, and this is a comprehensive part of it. We partner with an organization called the Conflict Center, who does an initiative called social norming. So they're kind of pushing the positive, healthy social norms in the culture. This hotspot mapping activity is helping us to identify and promote safe and unsafe spaces. And then we are reinforcing a lot of this education within our curricula, promoting healthy relationships. So huge opportunity. And when we first were charged with doing this, we were sort of like, all right, how do we even do this? Well, we do most of our work in schools. So our first step was identifying a school that had leadership, administrative leadership, that really bought into our services and they could see the connection between this hotspot mapping initiative and the other services that we provide. So we selected a school with an administrative champion and got the buy-in there. Once we had that school identified and we began doing work, this was our first year going through this, so a lot of it was abstract and unknown. So we identified some youth leaders to help us to create a map and to conduct the activity, which moving forward we would like the youth to be an even greater part of that development piece and leadership of the work. And then once we were able to finally get the map, which actually proved to be a little bit more challenging than we would assume because it's kind of an intricately shaped building, we were able to implement the activity and take steps from there. So I think we'll go into step 2.
Great. So step 2, so once you've found sort of who you're going to be working with, like Derek mentioned, you have to identify a shared space. So in Derek's case, for example, he identified a school that they were going to work, and that was going to be the shared space. In a community, it looks a little bit different, and there's a lot of opportunity to really engage young people to help them define what community do they want to map, or how are they defining their community. And then another core step of step 2 is actually facilitating the activity. And so this will likely happen multiple times. It's not a one-off thing. It'll happen with multiple groups of young people or community members over time. And there's sort of the guidance I discussed before from Shifting Boundaries includes discussion questions that are easily adaptable. And so Derek will talk a little bit about what this process has looked for him as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was really key for us to try and reach as much of the diverse population within a high school as possible. So we did what we could to get 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade participants, recognizing that the experience at those different levels looks uniquely different. And then when actually conducting the activity, we really wanted to take a positive youth development approach. So having different learning styles integrated. So we had the visual with the map, and we also did the questions. We had space for them to write written responses around who they felt safe with and why. We asked them to list off 3 teachers or 3 staff members. And what was pretty interesting was that throughout the participant pool that we worked with, almost all of the staff at the school we worked in were identified at least once, which was a really positive shared outcome that we were looking for. So once working through the activity with them, we realized that some people aren't writing very much. Some people are writing a lot. So we also went around to each student while they were writing their responses and asked them questions so that we could get verbal responses as well. And we would just kind of confidentially jot down what those verbal responses were. And it kind of varied from student to student. Some students did a great job on the map and had written responses. Others had stuff that was less legible. So we had to really take notes as we were going through and get the whole across the board. Some people would draw pictures, and others would make comments around, I'm safe at school, I'm safe with my friends, it's at home where I'm not safe. Or I'm never safe at school, I'm only safe at home. So we tried to have a little dialogue around what's the why behind that so that we could help promote to them and reinforce how to create safe spaces of their own and how to get support in those situations where they need support.
Do you want to move on to step 3?
Yeah. Yeah, so this is an example of the map that Derek actually used. So this is something that they would mark up on to indicate where they felt safe and unsafe. The next slide shows some of the questions that were used for collecting the information that Derek just described. And something kind of unique, too, is, like I said, we have several partners who do this, and it looks a little bit different for everyone because we want it to be flexible and responsive to community and school needs. And so something unique about the way Derek has been implementing this work, too, is really focusing on a strengths-based approach, and so really identifying and focused on what are the spaces that you should feel safe and how can we replicate those. And then organically, oftentimes, they'll identify spaces that they don't feel safe as well, but it's an interesting sort of twist or frame to the way that they've chosen to do this work.
Mm-hmm. And we sort of took the lead of Conflict Center on that one, emphasizing the positive. We actually passed out green markers for safe spaces, yellow markers for those sort of moderate spaces, and then we offered the opportunity for them to, if they chose to, disclose red zones. We had red markers for that as well. But we really wanted to highlight and promote the safest spaces and how we can make other spaces safe as those that are.
So on the next slide, so this slide introduces us to step 3. So after you've kind of gone through all of this, you have to analyze the data. And so it's really just about bringing together all of the collected data, and oftentimes that looks like creating a master map to show and represent that. Considering a follow-up discussion with participants, so it may be like, hey, this is what your entire school said. Now that we have all of this data, what do you think it means, and what are ways that we can change it? And then really, again, focusing on the why, but also what needs to change? How do we make these spaces safer or replicate the already existing safe spaces, and really pulling that information from young people to help drive that moving forward.
The Conflict Center did a great job on this piece of taking the information that we got from the activity and compiling it into a report. We didn't actually map out which spaces were safe and unsafe because there was so much inconsistency, which was really related to the year of the student and the gender. So we tried to break down in the report based on gender, based on ethnicity, based on where and when they felt safe and unsafe. And moving forward, there's a lot of detailed information that we can now collect, understanding what sort of answers to look for and what sort of answers folks are generally giving. So this is really kind of the creativity that you pursue through this initiative is really, to Danielle's point, based on what the community's culture is and what their highest pressing needs are. So really being open to listening and understanding the community is huge, but listening through this data analysis as well, and being able to see how that data connects to what we're hearing and seeing within the school culture and climate.
Thanks, Derek. This sounds really exciting, and I really like that you led with a strengths-based approach as you went about this. What successes have you had, and what kind of recommendations have come up from this process?
Yeah, so step 4, and there are slides for 5 and 6, and I'll kind of brush through them, but step 4 is identifying the recommendations, and then step 5 is presenting those recommendations back to young people, and step 6 is implementing. So Derek's going to talk a little bit about what that's kind of looked like so far with them.
Yeah, so one of the things that I think is coming out of a lot of these initiatives is greater staff presence in certain spaces and at certain points in the day. One of the times of the day that we identified was the lunchtime, where probably teachers are probably often having lunch with teachers and students are left to themselves often, and there's maybe a janitor or a principal, and it's just too many students per staff. So having more staff presence. There's a specific location in the school that we worked at that had low visibility from other areas in the school. Some students felt safe there because there's no staff. Other students felt unsafe there because there's no staff. So helping the school administration to understand how students feel in these spaces turned out to be a good recommendation. Specific staff being named over and over as people that students are safe with. We do understand that there can be some problematic teachers that come out of this and might need to get fired. Fortunately, that didn't happen at the school we're working at, and there was some standout performing staff, and we really wanted to talk about what is it that makes that staff member such a trusted, safe person to deal with, so that they can kind of promote that approach to adult professionalism. I'm looking through my notes here. Let's see. Just engaging the broader community in this conversation in itself we see as a success, because we are going into critical thought about this broad community level around these spaces and what is influencing those spaces, what is causing that dynamic to take place. It's really a rich critical thought education that's taking place there.
And can we move to the next slide?
Yeah. So one of the key recommendations that we actually knew going in and that we want to continue to follow through on is really identifying those key youth leaders who are really going to get engaged in this activity and bring some excitement to it. So we're starting this ball rolling early and really trying to identify the folks that we've worked with last year and the folks that the staff are identifying as youth leaders, to get them involved in this from the beginning of the year. So like they're going to be helping us create the map. They're going to help us identify which classrooms would be most impactful to do this activity in. And let's see, one last success that I really feel like came from this is identifying those problems that we didn't know. We don't know that a student felt unsafe at this certain time walking home from school because that's outside of school time and authority. So recognizing that there's a lot of spaces that are shared outside of the school, whether that be fast food restaurants or parks or gas stations, and that the school doesn't have much power outside of their hours or outside of their physical property. So building partnerships with these organizations to sort of at least share information, to communicate, and to know that you have each other's back. So whether that be creating a opportunity for youth to get a meal for a certain price at a certain day, or just, you know, establishing a name-to-name basis so they're not targeting certain individuals and really kind of having that implicit bias take place, which often happens outside of the school. Somebody might need some help, but they're being targeted as a criminal. So really helping community organizations to build a relationship with the school and the students in the school.
Great. And then the next slide. And so presenting results, which we'll talk a little bit about, encouraging young people to be a part of this process with their administrators is a really key component of this. And like I said before, it helps to have that buy-in already before you get to this place. And then 6, implementing recommendations. So we've had a couple folks who've been able to get this far, but for the most part, our partners haven't quite reached this stage yet. So like Derek said, they've identified several recommendations, and moving into this next year are going to be focusing on how do they start moving those forward.
Thank you. So we do want to ask another text chat question. I know that many of you identified issues at schools in your communities that already exist. And so now kind of thinking more about solutions, what type of environmental changes could be made to address safety concerns at schools in your communities? So we invite you again to use the text chat function to share your responses. I don't think we'll have time to report out themes, but we're looking forward to engaging through the text chat on that question. Danielle, from a state level perspective, I'm wondering if there are other successes that you'd like to share, and then either one or both of you, if you could maybe kind of tie that with what's next for your work.
Yeah. So I think some of the biggest successes to date, at least from a state perspective, is broad investment from general stakeholders and interest in this. So I would say that we got, in all of our communities, our partners were able to get schools to adopt this fairly quickly, which is sometimes rare with sexual violence prevention. And so that was really exciting. I've gotten calls from superintendents asking about how to bring this in. Again, pretty rare for sexual violence prevention work. And we've also seen a lot of folks who are working on like substance use and misuse, or folks who are working on youth mental health, who come to us thinking about how do we incorporate and integrate this into our work, because we see a lot of value that's shared between this work. So I think that's been one of the biggest successes we've seen. Additionally, I've already kind of spoken to this, but it's really helped us bulk up, I guess, our positive youth development work. Again, because it's a real opportunity to truly practice working with young people and giving them the skills and opportunities to actually grow and lead and change. And so that's been really fantastic. I think Derek kind of mentioned this as well, but this process is incredibly easy to adapt, and possibilities for implementation are truly endless. We have partners, when they implement particularly steps 2 and 3, they implement it using surveys or focus groups. Some have considered using photo voice, other forms of participatory youth research. And so it's really responsive. It's also just a really nice opportunity to figure out how you integrate it into your other work, which is our next success, which has been all of our partners, and Derek mentioned this as well, have truly found a way to integrate this into work they were already doing. So we were working with these same partners for the last 4 years on different prevention strategies, and we introduced hotspot mapping as an opportunity to integrate it into the existing work, not as something distinct or disparate. And that's actually worked pretty well, and our partners have found a lot of really unique and creative ways to integrate this, including using the results to inform a social norming strategy in a school, or integrating it or combining it with an existing curriculum. And most schools have been pretty willing to give our folks an extra 3 sessions with young people to be able to do this after their curriculum. So there's been a lot of opportunity around that, which has been great.
And just to piggyback Danielle there, outside of our hotspot mapping specific school, I integrated a hotspot mapping where you feel safe and unsafe and why question to our general curriculum survey. So I was able to report back to almost all the schools we worked at this year these results around where students feel safe and unsafe, and they could use that for their own culture and climate.
Yeah, and then on our next slide, it talks a little bit about some of our next steps. And so we anticipate this initiative will continue. We'll be bringing on potentially new partners in the beginning of next year. And so our hope is to see this work grow and move forward with some of our new and existing partners. We are also looking for opportunities. So since this is an opportunity to practice positive youth development, we're really trying to connect with our other youth engagement folks across the state around how do we work to do this together. And then I think the biggest piece is Derek mentioned this as well, but this past year and a half has been pretty experimental for us. It was our foray into community-level primary prevention of sexual violence. And we were a little bit new to it, and we weren't totally sure how it would all work. And so we are definitely taking lessons learned and trying to figure out how does that inform moving forward. And I think one of those pieces is really how do we frame hotspot mapping as a continuous process that's not a one-off piece, that's really well connected to community mobilization efforts and school climate. And so how do we look at this more comprehensively in the future and really bring schools on board in a way that it creates some kind of sustainability process within those schools that they can take this work on themselves in the future and build their capacity to be able to do this as part of school climate.
And to that point, I didn't mention this earlier when identifying a partner for this work. We were really adamant about identifying a partner that wanted to do ongoing work from year to year, not just be a one-year kind of trial and then gone. So the school that we partner with, we're coming back this year, and we are shooting for continuing to do work year after year. So that ongoing piece is really key, because ultimately there's a lot of staff turnover, and to land at a school with a staff that is doing what they can to stay there as long as possible. I know that's almost impossible, but doing that work, filling these people out.
Yeah, and I think another really great sort of thought around next steps too is because this is a broad process that engages several risk and protective factors, we're already in conversations with some of our other folks to put this in their work. And so this hotspot mapping started in sexual violence here in Colorado, but it's now been picked up by some of our folks doing substance use abuse and Connect Communities That Care. We have folks in our Office of Behavioral Health and Human Services working on it as well. We, like I said, talking about it with our youth engagement folks and working with school wellness coordinators. So it's been really cool because we're looking to explore how do we sustain this by not being the only ones doing it. Mm-hmm. And how do we broaden it beyond just sexual violence prevention, recognizing that obviously it's going to have an impact on sexual violence as well.
Thank you both for sharing. It was really nice to have the state level and some local practice examples as you shared, and seeing those steps illustrated at the local level of how you went about it, Derek, was really helpful. And Danielle, it was great to have that framing of the state perspective as well. We don't have much time for the text chat, but I did want to mention someone who brought up the issue around security officers in schools and how their presence in some cases has made situations worse. And so I think that really connects to the earlier conversation we had at the beginning around like the difference between school climate and public health approaches to safety versus like security as being like the leading force in safety. So I just wanted to lift that up. And we will be bringing Danielle and Derek back at the end to share some more. But right now, I would like to turn it over to our other set of guests. So there's three of them. I know on the slide you just see two right now, but I'll introduce Victoria and Maribeth, and then I'll also introduce Izzy. So Victoria turned to action research after almost a decade of campus feminist activism, and is currently a PhD candidate in education and community-based action research at the University of Cincinnati. Victoria's research focuses on feminist sexual assault education. Her research focuses on feminist sexual assault education in secondary and post-secondary settings, particularly using participatory methods through this work. Her dissertation features the use of participatory developed curricula in a high school classroom that uses young adult literature and use participatory action research to teach students about sexual assault. And I'll let you say a quick hello, Victoria, and then I'll introduce Maribeth. We can't hear you right now. You may need to press *6.
Hi, happy to be here.
Hi. Great, we can hear you. Thanks, Victoria. We also have Maribeth, who teaches advanced placement and college prep English at Findlay High School. She has a Bachelor of Arts in English and a Master of Arts in Education, both from the University of Findlay. A master teacher and teacher leader, Maribeth has taught at the high school level for over 20 years. She is passionate about social issues and utilizes literature and discussions within her classroom to help develop the social consciousness of her students. In the spring of 2018, she and Victoria piloted a sexual assault prevention unit at her AP English classroom, and they have plans of expanding the program to all of her classes in spring 2019. She and her husband resigned in Findlay, Ohio. And then I'll let Maribeth say hello.
Hello, Alicia. Thank you for having us.
Thank you for joining. And last but not least, I'd like to introduce Izzy. I did mention Izzy earlier on when you were text chatting. Izzy, who is a student that has been involved in the work with Victoria and Maribeth, and the image you see here is what Izzy created during this work that they're going to share all about. Izzy, do you want to say hello too?
Hello.
Hi. So I thought that it might be good if you all could start off by sharing how your research and school partnership began.
Okay, yes, I'd like to address that, Alicia. Victoria and I began working together several years ago, the 2014-15 school year. Victoria began doing some work out at Findlay High School where I worked, and as we were there, we developed some mini units together that she helped me to present to my AP students. And, you know, just throughout the course of conversations, we both got to talking about the idea of sexual violence and the violence that students can face at the high school level, and how there really isn't much information out there to help guide these kids. So after a couple of years, when Victoria went to the University of Cincinnati to start her PhD program, she contacted me about her area of dissertation study, which was teaching high school kids about sexual assault and its prevention by going through an English classroom and using literature in order to do that. So that's when, I guess a little over a year ago, in March of 2017 is when we started planning and writing the curriculum. And then this past year in March of 2018 is when we piloted the program to, I think it was very successful. We decided to use AP students that I teach, AP juniors, for a couple of reasons. We thought juniors would be more emotionally prepared for this type of a unit, and also we really felt that AP students, at least in our school, are very involved in a lot of activities and are kind of the leaders. So we felt that they would be a good group to start with to kind of help get word around the rest of the school, so to speak.
Thanks for sharing, Maribeth. So can the two of you start off by sharing, or I guess Victoria, how your research and school, or sorry, how did you go about your action research process?
So we started with a process called structured ethical reflection, which is a process in which you root your partnership, your research, your action in shared values. And so this slide is an example. You can't see it really well, but what you do is you decide on some core values like respect, compassion, and then you also identify the different stages of the process. And so you make a grid, and in each cell of the grid you have a question that guides you for the process of discussing this with the administration, how am I going to demonstrate courage or how, empathy, whatever the value is. And so it really serves as a framework that at each stage in the process, you have something to prompt you through your core values. So that was the very first step. And we have this grid, and we, at every point in the process, we refer back to it. After we generated the questions in the grid, we moved on to planning the curriculum, which was a process of trying to align sexual assault learning objectives with learning objectives for the English class. So that way we're spending 6 weeks talking about sexual violence, but we're not sacrificing the class time. There's still learning objectives to prepare students for the AP test. So the curriculum was participatory. We did these activities such as action planning, photography, arts-based work, and that is the art that you're seeing on our slides, by the way. And it's interdisciplinary, so we're working in artwork, we're working some literature discussion, obviously, and action plans. There's a bit of public health when we're talking about the actual information about sexual violence. And then the program can be adapted to different classes. We're in the process of adapting it to the college preparatory class as well. Yes, so these are our learning objectives for sexual violence. In the interest of time, I'm not going to read them. And then these are our learning objectives for English, and this is the book, The Mockingbird. So the students read that. They completed journal entries about that. They received direct instruction, but then they did photography, they did artwork, and they did their action plans. So that is.
Sounds like it was a very integrated process and had lots of different components to it. I did want to put out a text chat question on our next slide.
Okay.
Asking if folks in the audience have ever used photography or other arts-based approaches and kind of how they've gone about it. And if you haven't used it, we'd love to hear how maybe you could incorporate these types of approaches into your work. And with that, can you share more about the action planning and kind of what the next steps are for your work?
Okay, so I'm going to talk through some of the next steps, and then I'm going to turn it over to Izzy so she can talk through her action plan as well. So the next steps, one of the things we're doing is we're trying to engage the students who have been through the program already, and we're starting a student group, youth advisory council sort of thing, to really focus in on, we've got, as we're doing this, we have the curricular in-classroom piece, but we're really hoping that this group will help or will take the role, take on a leadership role in shaping school climate. So we're in the process of, we're going to have conversations with the students about forming that group. The administration is behind it. We've also got, we had some students in their action plan who actually put together a survey about, did you learn about sexual violence in health class? Are you happy, are you happy with what you learned? Are you, what all did you learn? So, to kind of gauge what that is. And then some of the next steps that we discussed, and I think we'll discuss it a little bit later, is that, like I said, in year 2, we're preparing for to go from just the 2 AP classes to all 6 of Maribeth's classes. We're trying to increase student engagement, and we are also developing an in-service to train school personnel based on what we've learned. And I am working on developing a class that will be taught will hopefully be taught at UC, where I'm getting my PhD, for pre-service teachers to learn about teaching social issues and using a participatory structure. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Izzy so she can talk about her action plan.
Okay, yes. So when planning this action plan, I had other group members with me, and we had to decide whether we wanted to focus on like the community or the school, and we also had the choice on whether we wanted to complete it or not. So it was kind of all to our imagination on what we wanted to do. But I think as a group, we decided that it was integral to have something that was tangible and that we can put straight into the school that you can see and that will have that you can look at every single day through the hallway. So we decided on doing a poster, and we wanted to do it. We actually did it during Sexual Assault Awareness Month, which was April, and we put it through the hallways. And one of the major things that we wanted to focus on was the location of where we wanted to put these out, and we actually put them in the bathrooms, boys and girls, because we wanted to make it accessible, but also we know that there's a certain, you need privacy in order to, we have QR codes that that the students can interact with, but sometimes we know that the audience may not be as comfortable to go up to these in the hallways. So by putting it in the bathrooms, it's more of a private area, and if you want to interact with the poster, you can. And we wanted to be able to catch their eye, so we put a couple of facts on there. But not only with that, we wanted to be able to access more information and help resources so that the students, if they wanted to learn more about it, they can reach these other sites.
That's awesome, Izzy. And it's interesting how you're thinking about how the issue may be looked at as like a private matter, but then still making it a school issue and community issue. So like putting them in the bathrooms to still show like this is an issue in our schools, but addressing where people are at as well.
Yeah, and I was mentioned.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was to also mention that we did put it in the hallways and breezeways just so that like maybe visitors could see it, or and the staff included, not just the students. So we wanted to reach everyone in the school.
Yeah, that's great. And so I understand that this was just one of the groups that went through the action planning process as part of this curricular activity. Victoria and Maribeth, do you want to add anything else here?
One of the things that came to mind that I forgot to mention in the outline, but we have, when I started talking, when we went to the administration to talk about this, we had the curriculum director mentioned the health curriculum, which the health curriculum came up multiple times in different ways throughout this process. But we had some students do their projects around the health curriculum, and so the curriculum director actually wanted to meet with me, and because of my background. And so one of the things we're doing, it hasn't happened yet, but in the fall we're setting up a meeting with him, and we're actually bringing in some of the students that researched health curriculum, so that way they can share what they learned in their action plans about. We had one group talking about affirmative consent, integrating that into the health curriculum. We had the group that did a survey. So we're going to bring representatives from those groups into that meeting so they can share what their insights on what the health curriculum should be.
That's great. And I like how you're thinking about it in terms of curriculum, and then some of the action planning also goes beyond curricular to really thinking about the school as a whole too, and actions that can happen in different aspects to really change school climate as well. So I'd like to go back to the text chat. It seems like a lot of you have used arts-based approaches, are interested in using them. And it's definitely an area I'm really interested in. One that stood out to me is there's an activity of mask making, and exploring the inside and outside feelings. So I've seen this activity before where you'll write what do people not know about you on the inside, and then kind of what do people see externally about you. And I know it's been used for conversations on like masculinities and that type of thing. So neat that that came up as something that's been helpful. Ashley, what else have you been seeing?
So folks are partnering with theater classes and theater groups. I've seen that a lot. I know that, let's see, there was one that I have lost. Even creating like songs or music related to sexual assault prevention. So Kenneth says that they created a sexual assault prevention rap. Folks using video games. I've also seen people use like comic books or comic strips. Photo voice was one that's come up, and I've actually seen that in my local community. So those are some of the things that folks are sharing, Alicia.
Cool. And yeah, I see that these are being used for looking at sexism and patriarchal ideals and how they shape gender roles and norms, I guess. So using arts-based approaches to lift up some of that, and I'm sure other things as well. So with all of that, and hearing a bit about the work that Victoria, Izzy, and Maribeth are doing, I'm wondering if you all can share what lessons you've learned through this first phase of your work, understanding that it's still ongoing and expanding.
Yes, as far as some of the lessons I've learned, this is Maribeth talking. One thing that really stood out was the importance of everybody in the school building being on board, that this isn't just about teachers in the classroom trying to help students. It's making sure that every adult in the building who comes in contact with students knows how to be that trusted person that a student can turn to, knows how to stop behaviors that shouldn't be going on, is able to recognize some of the warning signs, things like that. And also making sure that some of the students in the class said they were very comfortable talking to, say, a guidance counselor, but that it was trouble getting to that guidance counselor, that sometimes the people who serve in those gatekeeper roles are more concerned about getting a student back into the classroom and not recognizing when a student might be in distress and needing something. Another lesson that I learned, something that came up, was how important the students themselves thought this was, that when we approached this topic, they were very eager to talk about it, very enthusiastic, even though at times in class there were some awkward, shall we say, conversations, things you don't normally talk about with your English teacher. But it's important to, persevere and push through that level of awkwardness, because the kids really want to talk about this, and they really want to be heard, and they want their concerns to be taken seriously.
Thanks. And what about for you, Victoria?
One of the things that I noticed was that the students really, I conducted, in addition to all of the stuff that was happening in the classroom, I also conducted some interviews with students. And every student I interviewed, in the first interview, we talked about their definition of consent. And I had left it, I had left it open. And most of the students are starting with a definition of consent that is an affirmative definition. And actually, I said most, I mean all of them, all of the students I talked to had an affirmative definition that consent was a yes. It wasn't just an absence of a no. So that was a very good thing. But even though they all said that, then when we came back at the end and we talked about their experience in the program, many students still expressed how useful the unit on affirmative consent was, that they knew it was yes, but that that spelling out that, these things are not a yes, that, badgering someone until they say yes is not a yes. Like that they thought that the information about consent and coercion and all of that was really helpful to have it spelled out for them.
one of the other lessons that we learned is just the idea of incorporating some time into a unit like this, incorporating some time for self-care. That, we spent 6 weeks talking about this. For some of the students, towards the end, they were getting a little tired because it is a heavy subject, and it's a heavy subject to spend a lot of time on. And so we started to notice that, and we gave them a day to kind of rest. Not everyone took us up on it. Some of them went to the computer lab and worked on their action plans, but some people drew quietly. We did some breathing exercises in class, and that was really helpful. And I think that that's something, if you're going to be doing anything like this for an extended period of time, making the space for self-care and making the space for we're actually doing this, not just saying like, oh, do you guys need it? If not, we're slowing down. That was essential. And one other thing that I learned that's not on the slide is that most of the students cited the internet as where they learned about sexual violence. So that's just something to keep in mind, that this program really was filling a need that students weren't feeling like they were getting this education in the school. Izzy, do you have anything you want to say?
Yes, I think I want to speak more on online. So before this program, I did know about sexual assault. I watched a documentary, and I read a couple articles through social media, and that's how I found out about it. But I think it's also important to know that this program, one of my biggest takeaways was that even though I did know about sexual assault beforehand, I didn't really personalize it. And this program definitely helped to close that distance between it happening to someone else and potentially happening to me. And one of the major things that helped me was the photography project. And I actually got to photograph my sisters, and that was a really eye-opening moment, because I got to see that this can happen to anyone and anyone that I know. And whatever I can do to help prevent that, I'm going to do. And this program definitely helped me have a voice and become a leader, and be able to spread awareness and prevention throughout my community.
Thanks, Izzy. Really appreciate you sharing your personal experiences with all of this, and Maribeth and Victoria also for sharing what you did. And I really like how you intentionally thought about taking time for self-care as part of the work too. I do want to bring back our guests from Colorado, Danielle and Derek, and I'd love if they could share share more about lessons or challenges that they've had. And while they're doing that, I'm wondering if Victoria, Maribeth, and Izzy, if you could respond in the text chat to Porter's question around how did you get parents to buy into this work and allow their kids to participate? Because I'm not sure we're going to have time to talk about it orally, so if you could maybe respond to that on the text chat, that would be great. But Danielle and Derek, what kind of lessons or challenges have you been learning from?
So as you can see on the screen, incorporating emotional safety or community context in the mapping, that proved to be challenging, and I see it as an opportunity. Oftentimes when we're talking safety, we're thinking physical safety, so that's oftentimes where youth automatically go to. But helping them see that you might go to a space that you feel physically safe in, and if you haven't had the support you need to heal and overcome your emotional challenges, you could be doing unsafe things in those places, like going to my room where I'm safe and indulging in overeating or undereating or substance abuse. And then also just helping people understand that different people experience emotional discomfort for various reasons in different spaces. It could be that I feel highly comfortable in a locker room because it's the guys there and I'm a sports guy, I'm an athlete. not realizing that that guy that's right there sitting next to me is really, really uncomfortable and unsafe there because he's not so into athletics. And then just understanding that context varies throughout the community. So really getting creative and using this as an opportunity to have those conversations. Danielle, is there anything you wanted to add to that one?
No, I think that's solid.
Okay. So identifying shared community spaces. I think this is going to be an ongoing challenge. When we think about what makes a safe space, what makes an unsafe space, it's typically the who behind that space. So really helping the community understand what's the context of this space in the community, who's there at what time, and then sharing that information so that the community has a collective lens on it so that we can all share our voice and do something to promote that space as healthy.
And I think just something to add around that too is that we've been lucky in that we've had a lot of school partners willing to work with us on this project, and so it's fairly simple to identify a shared space in that context as the school or right outside the school. But for some of our partners who tried to actually do hotspot mapping in the larger community, it's more of a challenge to identify, okay, we're going to hotspot map Denver. What shared space do we identify in a massive city that all of our young people are sharing? And so that has been a challenge at times. We found some solutions to that, including asking young people to map or to talk about what do you think is a shared space? Why don't you tell us what this is and what we should map?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so these activities are definitely not surface level. They can venture into some realms that are totally unanticipated and unexpected. Where do all young people go? You know, that's something that's definitely a deal. And there's often places outside of the school that young people know that they go for the specific reason of having some isolation from adults. So even if it's not them disclosing fully to us, helping them to establish community values that create a safe space in that realm and lean on support when it's necessary, because there's oftentimes youth know that the school can't do anything about a fight outside of school grounds, so they go to that space, and just having the school people know about this and having the community know about it, keeping eyes on it, people in the community that are the nosy neighbors. I love these people because they're looking out in places that we wouldn't be. Ensuring youth involvement at every stage. This to me is the biggest piece. I think that the greatest impact that we can have in this is when it's youth-led. So we're really trying to drive it as much as possible into their hands so that they can do what they need to do with it, but because this is their school community, and we want to empower their voices at this point in life so that they move on and continue to lead in their adult life. Accessing enough participants, that's always a challenge working in a school. I'll let Danielle speak to outside of school initiatives. But when it comes to this, I think it's really important to, on the off season, so during the summer when you're in planning with the school, to really establish sort of a flow to the work so that you know at what point in the year you'll be doing what, so that you can really lead into each activity with a high level of communication so that teachers know that students will be being pulled from this or we're going to be in your class. There's often too many incidences in schools where, oh, we just had a shift in schedule and we've had this plan for a month or so. So being willing to adjust, but really being intentional about acquiring a broad, diverse participant pool in this activity, because I think that the more diverse the pool we get, the more realistic look we get at the community. Danielle, did you want to?
No, I think that carries over for community as well.
Okay. This happened, one person identifying unsafe space. This happened in several instances, and as mandatory reporters, we are pretty keen on this, and we don't really transform the whole activity, but we listen to that person and we connect them to the services that they need so that they're getting the support, especially if they're the only person.
Great, thank you. Now, before we get over to our resources section, I do want to allow our guests to share some of their key takeaways and tips from our session. So let's start off with Maribeth, Victoria, and Izzy. What are some of your tips?
So, Maribeth, would you like to start? Yeah, as you can see on the slide, we talk about getting the school to be a place of change and extending the partnerships and all of that. But I actually wanted to insert something here that isn't on the slide, but looking at comments from the chat that I just wanted to touch on. And that was the idea of the risks behind the art and the photography and, how to deal with that. And I just wanted to address that a little bit, that one of the first things we did is establish some norms in the classroom. So I definitely recommend before you do something like this, having some established norms of respect, cell phones away, a certain level of confidentiality amongst the students. We, of course, as teachers are mandatory reporters, and we make sure the students know that. The other thing we did is very early on, we had our school's guidance counselors as well as representatives from a family resource center in the community there, so that students knew that there were other people in the building and in the community that were there to help them if this brought up, if this triggered anything traumatizing, and things of that nature. So I wanted to make sure that that was addressed, because that's obviously very important.
And along those lines, one of the resources that we made available is the template from that norms activity, that, of establishing class norms and needs and values. And the other thing, it's not on the slide, but Izzy had passed me a note and reminded me to mention, we also provided the opportunity, if a student didn't feel comfortable, we had the opportunity for students to read an alternative book, and we had a student make use of that, but we were able to sort of create norms and create a space where that student, even though they read an alternative book, still felt comfortable participating in the activities in the classroom. The other big takeaway is just this idea of we're really using the school as a site of culture transformation, that we are trying to transform our school culture, and we're doing that in the classroom. We're using what we learned in the classroom outside of the classroom to, create partnerships, get more people on board, and really try to shift the culture, not just in the school, but in the community through the school. And so now I'm going to give it back to Izzy. There you go.
Yes, so I think another thing that I want to add was we, as a classroom, saw Victoria before the unit started, which I think helped because it was a familiar face. One of the challenges that I knew that was talking to my fellow classmates was the conversations can get a little awkward because they aren't really talked about a lot. So having her be a familiar face kind of made things a little bit easier, and the environment was it was more calming to have her be there before the unit started.
Thanks, Izzy, for sharing that. We will now turn it over to Danielle and Derek to share their tips. And we don't have too much time, so if you can maybe pick a couple and keep it short so we can get to resources. I apologize.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, so I think we've talked a lot about the youth and community engagement piece. It's, like I said, it's just a foundation to the way that we do this work, and the work wouldn't look the same without it. And so it's really what we push pretty hard with all of our local partners around how to really engage young people in leadership opportunities through this process. Derek will take the stakeholder buy-in, but just for the sake of time, I'll talk about opportunity to market. So again, this is just an opportunity. This is such a cool, unique process that you can really market broadly. And so we've been really able to market it to schools, for example, as a school climate measure, which they're responsible for, which they are really invested in, and really in part because we don't even talk about sexual violence, but also because we know that it's impactful across multiple different outcomes. And so for us, it's been a learning experience around how do we start marketing sexual violence prevention in a way that resonates with different or non-traditional partners and really builds investment. And I think this is a tool that we found a lot of success in doing that with, and thus is also in practice operationalizing a shared risk and protective factor approach, recognizing that we can go in and do hotspot mapping in your school, and we're likely going to be impacting suicide, bullying, sexual violence, etc.
Yep, I wholeheartedly agree with Danielle. This comprehensive approach, this is not eliminating or replacing any of the other comprehensive social, emotional, and violence prevention work that's being done. So really being strategic about connecting the dots there and adding layers of this to the education process, which in stakeholder buy-in was really key to our sales pitch, helping them see that this was a comprehensive approach, and we were doing this as a team between organizations, and initiatives, and really doing this whole collective buy-in piece together. It's been a cool start, and I'm looking forward to moving forward next year. And I agree with Izzy as well. Having that space prior to the activity is really crucial, so that you're not a stranger doing this activity. You might get some less impactful results if you don't have any relationship prior to the activity.
Thank you, Derek. So I know that we're almost out of time, but I did want to really thank our guests for sharing today, and it was really neat to hear state level, local level perspectives, and how we can really think about school climate in different ways. I'd also like to give a special shout out to Izzy for taking time during your summer holidays to be with us and share things about what you did at school during the year. So thank you, Izzy. In terms of our tools and resources, I want to just remind you that all the slides are going to be made available online, and we're going to right now share a bunch of resources in the text chat with you. So I'm just going to go through this really quickly. So all the artwork that you saw today was from a variety of students from the school that Maribeth teaches at. The Shifting Boundaries Activity Guide, class number 4 mapping exercise is what Colorado has been using as their starting place. So we're going to share a link to that, and you can refer to that to learn more. Also, we mentioned how Colorado has been doing a lot around youth development, so we're sharing a link for that as well as their youth engagement continuum, which I think is really interesting to think about how to move just from participation to really true partnership. So again, the link to that is being shared. Victoria also really took the time to create a reading list for all of us so we can learn more about structured ethical reflection as well as participatory action research. So there's a whole reading list for some nice summer reading for you, as well as the curriculum matrix template to see how they all aligned that, as well as the structured ethical reflection worksheet example. So we have a ton of resources. Please do download the slides to be able to access all this information after. And again, thank you all. My email address is on this slide. I'm going to hand it over to Ashley to close this out.
Thanks, Alicia. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Again, this recording, this has been recorded and we'll get that up shortly, so hopefully by early next week, this should appear at that link that we've been providing you. I just want to thank Prevention Institute, the Prevent Connect team, the Prevention Institute team, and all of our guests today. Thank you so much, Danielle and Derek, Izzy, Maribeth, and Victoria for everything, and of course all of you for your participation and sharing of the work you all are engaged with to advance the prevention work in your communities. We look forward to seeing you on the next Prevent Connect web conference, and again, if you're not already signed up on our newsletter, go to our website and do that, and you'll get the latest registration announcements. With that, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday, and we will see you soon. This concludes our web conference for today. Take care.
Thank you for listening to this Prevent Connect podcast. Prevent Connect is a project of the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault, with funding from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The views presented on Prevent Connect are not necessarily the views of the United States government, the CDC, or CalCASA. To learn more about Prevent Connect, visit www.preventconnect.org. For more information about CalCASA's mission or to show your support, visit calcasa.org. That's CalCasa.org.